Hi, welcome to the Thrivecast podcast. I'm Ben,
I'm Katie.
I'm Josh.
and we are your guys' hosts for this podcast. Thanks for joining us. Let's get started.
This is for real now. Wow. Okay. All right. So what we want to do with this podcast, guys, is do a weekly podcast where we talk about what matters most and kind of picking a topic and going from there, diving into what? Danny, is it still going? Okay. You're just giggling back there. So anyways, just want to hang out with you guys digitally, especially during this season where we have to be physically apart from large groups. We can still talk to you guys and connect this way. So this has been actually something that we've wanted to do for a while. So this is just kind of forcing the issue, which is a good thing. So we're coming to you from the youth room, the Thrive Youth Room. And yeah, so anything you want to add, Ben, as far as vision or what you want this to be?
No.
Okay. Katie, how about you?
Nope, I got nothing.
Oh, man. Danny, how about you? Do you have anything you want? No, I'm...
Never
Danny didn't have
talk to
dinner.
the cameraman.
Never
okay?
talk to
He
the
doesn't
cameraman.
matter.
Okay.
Wow,
Sorry,
that was
that
harsh.
probably shouldn't say that.
He can
You
edit
can
that out,
edit
yeah. All right, so today what we want to talk about is habits. Let's start off with maybe some funny habits that you guys have. Do you have a goofy or weird habit, Ben, that you've consistently done for years on end?
Well, when I was younger, and I do this a little bit now, whenever I'm in a group of a lot of people and it's really loud, when I was younger especially, I would just cover my ears.
He'd just walk
I just
around.
cover my ears so I couldn't hear anything.
Huh.
And I do that every once in a while just because usually I do it to be funny, but sometimes it's because it's just too much noise.
Is it like a physical thing where it actually bothers you?
No, it
the noise
doesn't.
level?
I'm an introvert, and loud noises and lots of people is not my forte.
Okay. How about you, Katie?
Any funny habits?
Yeah. A goofy habit that you have that's just, it's there.
I don't really know if I have one. I'm not sure. Do you have one?
I have several. I have a lot. Sometimes if I'm like nervous socially or whatever, I'll start like picking my lip, which is a weird one. Or
Like with your
That's
finger?
weird.
Like,
yeah,
okay, that's weird.
yep, it is weird. It's a nervous habit. And then, well, the other one, a lot of you guys have seen at youth group where I'll tend to look off to the left. I do that at church too, where I very rarely will look to the right.
He's got the gym thing from The Office, but instead of looking at a camera, he just looks to the left.
Yep. I'm severely left-handed. That's my excuse. Is I just kind of
Everything's so... Wait,
everything. Yeah.
not everything.
Yep. What are some bad habits that you have that you know? Getting a little bit deep here.
These are the kind of questions that it would be nice to know beforehand so we can prepare our
So you can-
answers because
Off the cuff, though. I mean, you know, what's a bad habit that you have?
I feel like Katie would be better at saying my bad habits.
Oh,
than
there we
I
go.
would.
I thought you were
okay,
going to
this is
say
good.
Katie
No.
should say her bad habits because she has a lot.
She's got like 5 that really. No, I'm just kidding. That's
well,
good though.
are we totally going to have a roast session? Because, just kidding.
No, not a roast session, but just maybe a habit that you've
Okay, here's a
recognized.
bad habit
Yeah.
that Ben has, and people at youth group probably know this, but he leaves and doesn't say goodbye. He just walks out. Like, he doesn't say, like, see you guys, I'm leaving. He just leaves.
Sometimes
and
I think that goodbyes are just a waste of time. Like,
But people, like, they feel like they can't love you if you just leave, and then they look around like, where's Ben? So that's a bad habit
That's
of yours.
good. Okay. Ben, what bad habit does Katie have? Just name one. Just one.
Just one. We know there's a lot to choose from.
I'm having a hard time thinking of them, not because Katie is perfect in any way. When Katie gets upset, she gets very upset, and she gets very, like, constricted and angry.
Yeah. So, what does Katie look like angry? I'm curious about. It. I'm sure a lot of people are curious about
It's
that.
pretty bad.
I don't know if I've ever seen Katie angry. I've seen her.
No, she's pretty good about
Flustered, but not-
keeping it controlled when she's in public, but when she's at home, she's just a monster.
I don't
No,
know.
she's not actually a monster. At least not from what I can tell. I'm usually not home, so
You
you'll
just see
have
the
to-
Bad
damage.
habit of
Ask
Ben's.
them
He's
all.
never home.
He's never home. Oh.
I had like a bad habit when I was in choir, and I'd have like solos, and I'd be standing there and I would just like tug on my shirt and just like fiddle with it. And my choir director was like, "You have to stop because that's distracting." And when I did like speech and debate, in the speeches that like you have paper with you, I would like curl the edges of the paper because that was like a nervous habit that I had. But I don't know. I guess a bad habit is just talking a lot sometimes.
So Josh, what
Dana's-
about you? What about your bad habits
Uh,
other than the?
it used to
weird
be.
lip
I
picking
used
thing?
to, and I've talked about this a little bit before, but where like with coffee, specifically with Dutch Brothers, where I used coffee as like a coping mechanism to where if things felt out of control, my habit was to go to something that I could control, and so that was. Especially like with Evelyn and that I was drinking a light ice kicker almost every single day because that was how I was coping with my grief, which it wasn't a good habit. It wasn't a healthy habit, but I could count on that. I couldn't count on Evelyn's heart beating, but I could count on me going to Dutch and getting a light ice kicker. And so that was, I definitely put on a decent amount of weight during that time and then not good emotional weight either because I was frustrated at God. So, yeah, I'd say that would definitely be probably a bad habit. Currently, though, I think probably a bad habit is I'll get flustered and kind of get all inside my head, where I'm very much a verbal processor, and so if I try to internally process too much, I end up just thinking things that aren't true, and getting kind of frustrated with that. So. Verbally processing for me is better than internalizing it because I also tend to be my own worst critic. So when I have the habit of internalizing things and thinking about that inside, I don't have any sort of advocate there. It's just like, yeah, you're horrible, and there's no upside to that. So
Yeah, I can relate with that a little bit. I don't necessarily like become my biggest critic or anything. I don't usually like tear myself down, but I do internalize most of my thoughts. And so one of my bad habits, I guess you could call it, is just not sharing enough with my family. Showing emotion is not easy for me. And honestly, there was a couple year period when I was in like early high school that I didn't really show much emotion at all. I mean, it's gotten better over the years, but it's still hard for me, and it's hard to just like, this is how I'm feeling, telling my family or whatever, just because I don't always feel like they need to know because it's, it's my problem or whatever. So
Yeah, and I think something that's weird is that even though we're raised in the same family, we do have very different habits, just even in that where you're an internal processor and you have like more of a habit of keeping things like close inside, and I kind of just wear my emotions more like on my sleeve and am more open with things. And so it's just like even when you're in the same family and you end up different and like things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and on that rabbit trail, because this podcast will do rabbit trails, and it's okay. The goal on Wednesday when we're doing teaching is to stay on track, and Ben is excellent at that. But it's interesting to see and kind of observe even with you guys where internally processing things is super, super good in that if that's how you process things and how you get stuff figured out. Some of the most wise counsel or wise comments have come to me through people that have internally processed something, meaning they don't just verbally out loud tell me what they're thinking. I'll say something to maybe provoke it or to bring it up, and then they'll cook on it and get back to me like the next day, and that's really good. That's really healthy. But like I said, then going back to me, where when you talk with somebody that is more verbal processor or is an extrovert, you kind of have the introvert extrovert kind of comparison there. Extroverts, you feel safe maybe crying in front of, or you just say things and you're like, oh, I don't know why I was saying that. Well, it's because the person is able to empathize right away with you. The danger can sometimes be, again, the kind of pros and cons with that I've seen is that the consistency isn't necessarily there. So somebody might be super empathetic and like right there with you, but they really didn't hear what you said, versus an introvert is actually listening to what you say and is processing it and will get back to you like days later. And just
that's a bad
value.
habit of extroverts
Yeah.
is to be
We'll
like,
talk over people.
Yeah, yes, and I definitely have
Yep.
that.
And I don't know if you've noticed this. There's some people that I've talked to too, where they're extremely extroverted, and you can see it in their eyes where they're already thinking about the next thing they're going to say, and they've stopped listening to you. They've like totally checked out. And I think that can be a bad habit traditionally in extroverts, which I am definitely one. So I don't know. I think there's good and bad habits that form with those different personalities. But I think one of the things that I appreciate so much about Thrive is that we have such a good mix of everybody, not just in the leadership team, but also in the youth group, to where there's a lot of diversity there as far as how people handle that. But for me as an extrovert, what I've learned marrying an introvert is that the way that you honor them is you don't like, well, kind of almost what we're doing tonight. I'm sorry for dishonoring you, Ben, with that, of giving people off the cuff, like, hey, let's talk about this right now. For an introvert, that's very uncomfortable because that's just not how they process information, especially important information. If it's just casual, like, hey, how's your day? Or, hey, what do you want to eat for dinner? That's not something you internalize necessarily. But maybe sometimes it is. Maybe you had a bad memory at that place last time you went there, or that kind of thing. And sometimes extroverts will just kind of fly by the seat of their pants and just be like, hey, let's just wing it. And so as I've gotten older, I feel like some of my bad habits that I picked up from being more extroverted have kind of shifted and matured a little bit, I hope. But I was definitely not extroverted when I was young. That's been kind of interesting too. Where
That just blows my mind.
I was
like,
so
I really want to know what
introverted.
you were like as a kid.
I
Because
was
I've
shy.
always been extroverted.
I wouldn't speak up in crowds. I was just like,
I was so quiet as a kid that a couple years ago, I was trying to say something when our family was gathered together, and I was getting very frustrated because everybody was talking. And my other sister was like, Ben, it's not our fault. We just don't recognize the sound of your voice because you never talk. That really hit me. Which, like, I'm over it. Whatever. But,
Clearly.
well, we should probably move on to
Good habits.
good habits. Yeah, there you go.
Well, we should probably move on to building habits because that's really what we want to talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
I was the one who suggested this topic, and what brought that on is a lot of the things that, especially in the youth group, things that people are trying to work on, whether that's praying more or reading your Bible, that all is based on habits, and we will be talking more about those specific topics later. But on this podcast, we want to just talk about vaguely, briefly, how you can build habits and like what that looks like. So, Josh, do you want to start with any comments about how to build habits?
Yeah, I think the first part of any good habit, good or bad, but we want to focus on good. I appreciate the shift there, is repetition. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it right every single time. Throughout the whole Bible, we're called to practice things. We're practice this, practice that, meaning you're not going to hit it every single time. That does not give you an excuse to then stop or quit the habit. So good habits like reading your Bible or praying, like those are kind of ingrained into our heads from a young age, especially if you've grown up in the church. But where it can start losing its power is when you're doing something and you're like, well, I don't know, it didn't really work. Well, that doesn't mean you quit that habit. We're in a habit of eating. For most of us, I typically don't eat breakfast, but some people are in the habit of eating breakfast at a certain time. They eat lunch at a certain time. They eat dinner at a certain time. Well, their bodies your body will respond at that time. If it's 8:00 and you normally eat breakfast at 8:00, if you haven't eaten and it's 8:30 or 9, your tummy's going to be growling, right? And same thing with lunchtime. If you always have lunch you don't even need to look at a clock sometimes. I don't need to look at a clock when I've developed a habit, especially eating, where I'm like, okay, this is what time I eat. So my body tells me when it's time to eat. So when we develop spiritual habits and those habits start forming and we're doing them repetitively, there's good things that happen in that. So tackling prayer, for example, like if prayer is my go-to habit when stuff is going sideways, when stuff's going good, when stuff's going bad, whatever, if I am in the habit of praying about everything, that helps in times that are difficult, because I've already developed that habit of, I'm not wondering, man, what do I do? How do I cope with this? Like, I pray. And especially in light of everything that's going on right now, prayer has been a huge part of hearing from God, asking God what he's thinking, seeking out truth, going at it from that habit of prayer where that's my go-to. And so building that habit has been difficult. It hasn't been easy, and it hasn't worked all the time either. Sometimes I'm like, man, I just prayed this and nothing's happened. Nothing's changed. That doesn't mean I stop praying for that. It means I go at it again and I go at it again until God tells me, hey, stop, or I've already answered it, or no. You know, those kind of habits can be difficult when you don't see the results, but it's still something we need to practice.
Yeah, and I think especially for prayer, because you can kind of have a mentality of like only praying when something's going bad. It's like, oh, my life sucks right now, and God, please fix it. And then when your life's going great, you just kind of forget about thanking God. Or you could do, vice versa. But especially in like a time right now where there's a lot of uncertainty, like it's just, there's so much unknown right now. And so just having a good habit of, whether it's a good day or it's a bad day, of going to God in prayer and thanking him and asking him for things, and also just having like an open relationship with God where you should be talking about like everything with him. And like sometimes it can feel weird of just like talking about anything, but is not what you do with your best friend, is you talk about everything with them. And so, yeah, it's really important to have like that good habit of whatever it is going on to be praying, and to have a habit of daily prayer, if not more often than that.
Yeah. Repetition is key, but also a couple other things to keep in mind is consistency. If you're trying to build a habit like working out or something, then you want to be doing that on a schedule.
Yeah.
Like hopefully you have like a weekly schedule where you're like, I'm working out this day and that day, resting that day. You want to have it planned out. You want to be able to have it down to, when you need to do it. Not like, oh, I feel like working out today, and working out, that's not really going to get you results.
Feelings-based habits aren't good.
Right.
Yeah.
Feelings-based habits don't really work out. Also, you want to be strategic about that sounds kind of odd to say when you're thinking about like prayer or reading your Bible, but a strategy is super important, because you need to think about, like, let's take Bible reading for example. You want to think about what time you're going to be able to be reading your Bible every day. You don't want it to be like I need to read my Bible today. Like, that's good, but it will be more effective if you set a certain time. Like, okay, I wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning, so maybe I should do my Bible reading at 7:30 so I can eat breakfast and then just sit down right there and read my Bible. Or maybe it's right before I go to bed. You want to be strategic about that, so you're not reading in the morning one day, reading in the afternoon the other day, back to the morning. It's still good. Like, it's still good to read your Bible. And if you plan to do it in the morning and you miss it, like, I would encourage you to, yes.
Don't just give up.
Don't give up. But it's more efficient and more effective if you are strategic about it and like you set a certain time for that.
Mm-hmm.
So like for prayer is a little more like you can pray whenever, but it is probably a good idea to set a time. Like
Yeah.
I know a lot of people pray right before they go to bed. That's a great idea. Or like when they wake up in the morning, like when they're making their breakfast. So if you can be strategic about when you plan that and then be consistent to follow that plan,
Mm-hmm.
that will get you the best results.
Yeah, and I think one thing with making habits, it's hard because in our day and age, we're so used to getting things like instantly because of like the internet and just the way the world works. And so when you want to like, oh man, I want to like get ready for my summer bod, whatever, it takes time, and we're not used to things taking time. We're used to getting something right away. Like, oh, there's a movie, I'm going to watch it. I'm going to stream it on my phone like right now. And so when I was younger, I always was like, oh my gosh, I want to be like my friends' moms who are reading their Bible every day. They're super godly women. And I kind of just had like this mentality for a little bit of like, oh man, when I'm their age, I'll be great at like this Christianity thing. And then one day I was thinking about it, it's like, that's stupid. Like if I'm going to eventually be that, if I am going to get to a place where I'm reading my Bible daily, praying daily, you got to start working for it now. And I think it's especially true for younger people because I don't know if you guys are told this, but when I was younger, I was always told like what you're doing now, that's going to be building your character. And it's going to be kind of like it's up until like you're 20. I mean, you can still change, but a lot of the things that you do, especially like when you're a teenager, affects who you are going to be. And so it is important to create good habits and start them now.
Mm-hmm. I can't remember the exact quote of it. I wish I would have wrote it down, but it was at a Frontline, and we were talking about kind of around the habit of like why we read the Bible. And one of the students said just essentially like reading the Bible to, do you remember? I'm trying to remember exactly what they said, but basically not reading the Bible to just gain information, but reading the Bible to figure out deeper meaning for things or context or
Also to get to know God.
yeah,
better.
just the relational connection part of it. And I think that's a good habit that we can have, to where it's like, okay, if we're reading the Bible, if we're praying, they sound cliche, they sound kind of like bumper sticker stuff, right? But they really are good, where if your first response is, well, I'm feeling this way, but I'm going to see what the Bible has to say about it. That's such a good habit. And it's something that where, again, one of those habits that I had to break was, growing up in the church, I knew a lot about the Bible, but as far as practical application of things and habits that had a reason or a purpose behind them, I think that's the thing, where habits that are, good, bad, or whatever, like a good habit should be really difficult to break because you see the benefit of it, you feel the benefit of it, you're like, man, this is really good and it's enriching to my life. There's fruit that's coming out of this habit. This is really good. Bad habits can also be hard to break because they can typically be based in like an insecurity or something where you're like, I just can't quit hating myself, or can't quit, you fill in the blank. But it's super important that as we form some of these habits too, that the verse that talks about, think about these things, whatever is good, whatever is noble, whatever is, all these things, to really take those things and focus in on those and be like, okay, I'm going to form a habit around joy. And maybe you discipline yourself and like, okay, for this week, I'm just going to focus in on joy, and I'm going to focus in on being connected to Jesus, and from that connection with Jesus, I'm going to get joy. And joy doesn't mean happiness. Well, okay, so what does joy mean? Well, explore that a little bit. And maybe as you develop a habit, especially in this season where we're at, where we're kind of doing things a lot differently than we have in a long time socially, where this could really, really bring about some really positive things in all of our lives. Like everybody's going to get blessed by this. And it seems weird to say that a sickness could bring this about, but it's like you look at it and it's like, okay, we're not able to gather socially like we used to for a season. What are you going to do with that time? right? Are we going to waste all of our time on YouTube? Are we going to waste all of our time doing stuff that we, do probably too much already, that we already have bad habits of being on our phones too much? I just want to really encourage you guys right now too, that for a lot of you, and I'm going to lump myself in with this category as well, the primary bad habit that people under 30, or I don't know, I'm turning 34 on Monday, but have is being on their phones too much. Now, when stuff starts getting stressful, where do you go? Do you go to your phone, right? If you're bored, where do you go? Your phone, right? Typically, most of the time. I'd encourage you guys to start forcing yourself into a better habit of don't run to your phone. Next time you're stressed out, pick up your Bible or take a nap or go for a run or drink some water, or form a different go-to where it's not your phone. Because what starts to happen is when we get into bad habits like that, it turns into an idol. It turns into something where we are more comfortable on our phone than we are praying and being honest with God, or searching out something in the Bible. Hey, it might be hard for you to find that verse that relates to how you're feeling or what's going on, but it is there. And if you look for it, you will find it. Right? If you're looking for the truth, if you're seeking out Jesus and his heart for it, he wants you to find it. He's not like, it's not like that song says, you don't give your heart in pieces kind of thing, where he's leaving us breadcrumbs to lead us to something. When you discover something, it's way more, it sinks in a lot deeper when you discover a truth or you figure something out, like, wow, I never knew this before, than if somebody just hands it to you. And sometimes people like things being handed to them. I get that. Like, hey, birthdays are awesome for a reason. Christmas is awesome for a reason. But man, when you discover something where you're like, I'm going to seek this out. This is a really difficult concept. This is something that has eluded me for a long time. I'm going to go after it. I'm going to go after praying more. I'm going to go after worshiping with reckless abandon. I'm going to close my eyes in worship. I'm going to do this. I'm going to talk to this person. I'm going to go here. Once we start breaking those norms, and again, where we're at right now, this is a perfect opportunity to do that, because there's way more time freed up to where, hey, you're not going to school for a while. What are you going to do with the time? Right, unless you're homeschooled, right? But even with that, there's a lot of stress out there, and what are you going to do with the time? And for a lot of you guys, and myself included, we have some pretty important decisions to make about what new habits we could pick up in this season that will serve us so good in July and August and the fall. It's like, can you imagine if we start picking these things up? And it's like, wow. But
yeah, it's all good. We're gonna try to wrap up soon here. Just for reference, I don't know if anybody's gonna go back and watch these videos again, but currently it's in the middle of March in 2020, and the COVID-19 breakout is super present. So if you need reference, if you're going back and watching this later, that's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, we should be like within 6 feet of each other or something like that.
Just a couple things that I wanted to add before we leave. I want to encourage you guys to examine your lives, and maybe don't go looking for good habits and bad habits. Just look for habits. Mm-hmm. They can be normal habits like, oh, I eat lunch around like 1 o'clock. That's not necessarily a good or a bad habit. Like, that's neutral. But once you identify your habits, then you can look at them and figure out, is this a good habit? Is it a bad habit? Are there aspects of it that could be better? And that's a good way to, improve or to seek Jesus more in your habits, and a way to build on your good habits and to make better your bad habits.
Mm-hmm. The toughest question too, like I want to encourage you guys with this too, and you guys kind of modeled it actually in the beginning. When you really want to take inventory of some of the habits, good, bad, or whatever, ask somebody close to you and be like, hey, what are the things I'm doing well? What are the things I need to work on? And maybe you don't use the word habit or whatever, but maybe you go at it from a different way. But especially with what Ben just said, like take just a real inventory of everything that you're doing, and see. I mean, there's apps even for that where you can literally download an app on your phone that will tell you how much time you're spending on this. There's apps that you can put on your phone that will tell you how much you've been on your phone. Like the resources are out there. It's just a matter of if we're going to utilize those. So, do you guys want to talk about Corona for a little bit or no?
No.
Okay,
We
I think
don't
we're all
need to talk
Corona'd
about
out.
I think
Um,
we're good.
If you want to know more about Corona, I was being told tons of information today, so just hit me up on Instagram or something.
Find a reliable source.
Cools99. All right. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up here. All right. Keep striving, keep thriving.
Yeah.
That's a wrap.